Hello, Andrea, and welcome to Elevating Voices and Tell Your Story. It's great to have you with us.
Thanks, Jolie. It's really great to be here.
You have recently published your memoir, Such a Pretty Picture. Can you tell us a bit about why and when you started writing this book?
It's funny because I've been a writer for most of my life, on and off at different points. But I had even gone for an MFA at one point and got it. And I was in a fiction program. And what I wanted to write was short stories. Wrote lots and lots of short stories. And I never thought I was going to write nonfiction, and I never thought I was going to write a memoir, particularly a memoir. Particularly a memoir about my childhood sexual abuse. I wrote around it in stories. Some of the things that I had in some of my short stories were truly based on fact. And there's one scene that I actually retook and that was actually verbatim, not verbatim, but pretty close to the scene in the book. It was in a short story. But around 2017, two things happened. The Me Too movement and my father died. And confluence of these two things, as I started reading online what people were saying, another person saying, me too, me too, I started thinking, this is a community of people who are helping each other tell stories through their own stories. And I thought, I do have a story to tell. And I think my story could resonate with other people because while there was a lot about men in power, there wasn't really as much about childhood sexual abuse that I saw online, which really, in another way, in my case, it was also men in power, just happened to be my father. So I started writing the book because of that. And I still have a little bit on the fence, but then I went into a workshop with Samantha Dunn in 2018, I think it was. And the pages, which are actually still the opening pages of the book, I really blew people away. Okay, we know, right? This is a full memoir. And flash forward to a little time later, it's a published book, 7 years later. But it was about 5 years of really intense of writing.
5 years. That's what I was going to ask you, how long it took. And
Yeah. I like revision. And of course, one of the things I tell other writers is start looking at revision as a beautiful thing. Some of the art is in the first draft, but really the art is in the revision. That's where you can find the art.
yes, it feels like every part of your memoir fits together so beautifully and every detail and every scene. There's nothing excessive in terms of the details you've put in, and you've told such a powerful story. How did you piece it together? Was it always in the structure, or how did you get to this end product?
It was always mostly linear with a few flashbacks. I was more comfortable telling the story that way, to tell the truth. But there were other chapters in there. There were chapters people said, oh, you should write about this. For example, and without giving away too much, but one of the things my father does is before does his PhD, it comes in the first part of the book as a child. And I wrote an entire chapter about what that was. And somebody had said, oh, I want to know more about it. And then ultimately it was a good chapter. I like it. I have it in my computer. But I actually took it out. I had pieces that I took out and then some pieces that I put in, looking for places to give the reader a breath. I really tried to, because in some ways, the really tougher scenes were easier for me to write because they were so in my mind. I never forgot a lot of them, but trying to find those places where I could make at least my father, what he did was monstrous, but to make him less of a monster, readers tell me he still comes off as a monster. Nature pedophilia. So those kind of scenes I went back and looked at. But it took a while, a lot of rewriting chapter by chapter, putting it together. I wrote individual chapters, then reading it together as a whole several times, making decisions. Obviously, if you read my writing, I'm not a purple prose writer, which some people are. I have beautiful fabrics and tapestries the way some people do, but I tend to be more economical in my style. And I even made decisions to take out some of the reflections that are in more traditional memoir. That was a decision I made. I was working with a woman named Pam Houston, who was a well-known writer and teacher. And Pam told me many times, right? My instinct was less is more, which he was like, go with your instincts. Your readers are smart. They don't need an explanation for every little thing. Let them draw their own conclusions. And it's really stuck with me. I did a little memoir kind of take class about telling the story you don't want to tell at a small conference. And I think that was something he said is we have to trust our readers. We guide them through the story, but we don't have to hammer them with it. They can draw their own conclusions.
It's so interesting to hear you say that because as I was reading, it was something I couldn't put down once I started. The beginning is incredibly hard, but the twin events, not just by your father, but then your mother and how that must have felt as a child to have then the mother taken away to the hospital right at that moment and the blindness, it's packed in the beginning.
And it's not really a spoiler alert to say that the first time my father molested me, my mother walked in, or the first time I remember him molesting me, she walked in and saw what he was doing, hated and went along. So it's a really powerful scene. And I know it's hard.
Yeah, it really is because we put ourselves in your shoes. But your writing being economical really impressed me as a memoir author and as an avid memoir reader. I read a lot of memoirs and I read a lot of trauma memoirs, obviously with some dosage and some other reading. Your memoir sits for me in parallel with the memoir by Sue William Silverman, which you might have read.
Well, I had many years ago, but while I was writing this, I wanted to write my story first, but I read it long ago.
Yes, yes. And then it also reminded me of the glass castle in the sense of that we're in the story with you. And I didn't feel as a reader that I wasn't getting the reflection. I think because you're writing as the child, yes, you're looking back clearly, but you're in these moments of childhood. And for me, it works because you keep us there. And then there is the massive reflection when you turn 33. But even before, we can see that you're trying to hold things together and not repress, but tell the reader you're fine or tell yourself you're fine.
Yes, I didn't want to keep reflection out altogether. So I think that's important that you mentioned that. And I'd have periods where I'd start reflecting more because I started reflecting more.
Yeah.
The difference between a 13-year-old's point of view and a 4-year-old's point of view comes across. And of course, the language I use isn't the language of a 4-year-old necessarily, except for in dialogue. And I knew my reader going to realize that a fully grown adult woman was writing that's not. So that was one of the things that I was thoughtful about. And I had the reflection come in at key points. And I actually wrote more reflection, then I wrote less reflection. That was the editing part, which took a long time for me. Even up to the very end, I ended up taking out some. I felt very last minute reading, not supposed to do it. It was already in proofread, and I just this needs to go. And I wrote the editor and said, I just have to take it out. It needs to go right now. And I'm glad I did because in reading it, where I made those decisions, it was the right decision to make. I think we have to trust the story as memoirists. We want to tell the story we want to tell and not the story that other people want us to tell. But at the same time, we have to remember the first draft is for us and future drafts are going to be for the reader.
How did you decide where to end it?
That's an interesting thing. And I went so back and forth because there's more to tell. And I am going to write another book about that. But I'm 67 years old, and the book starts when I'm 4. And it's not just this tiny little space of time. It starts when I'm 4 and ends when I'm 33. And I could have gone on and on, but I honestly didn't want to write a War and Peace. My goal was to tell the story of what happens, to give the reader some insight into what I went through, and readers who haven't been through childhood trauma or sexual abuse, particularly, the impact of that as we grow, how much it is as people. And at the same time, I wanted to find a positive note to end it on, not a little rainbows and little bows and ribbons. So there's the end, and then the epilogue came to me later. I had already finished the book, And I was starting to shop it, and I still didn't have the epilogue. I was shopping it without the epilogue. One of the things that I realized is that Hannah Houston, who I worked with, had told me, and she is also an incest survivor. I can say that because she's written about it. And she said, "You're not going to finish this book until your mother dies. Data shit, holy shit." And I thought, wow, okay. My mother was alive when I started writing the book, and my mother very much didn't want me to write this. My mother was a big supporter of all of my writing for years, but she did not want me to write this book. We never spoke about it.
Did she know you were writing it?
We never got into it, but she told me, "I know that you're writing a book about your father and I don't approve." Quote, unquote. That is what she told me. And I think she knew because I always talk about my writing, and she's read a lot of my writing, and she was older and sick. And I had a couple essays published before she died. She was having some sight problems, real sight problems, not hysterical blindness at that point. And I read those to her, and she knows me well enough to know that there was something that I wasn't telling. And she didn't approve about the memoir. So I think I needed her to die, and her dying gave me a gift. She gave me a gift at the end. I can say it. She apologized for the first time in her entire life for what my father did. So she gave me the gift of the end of the epilogue. So it was those two things that I had a moment of true forgiveness. The book itself, the narrative ends when 8:33. The epilogue is the more recent. I didn't want to give the reader like a 1,000-page book. So I'm happy with where I chose. A lot of readers have asked for more. And I know there could be, but there has to be a place to end the book.
Yes. And I was so impressed as a reader that, yes, indeed, it starts when you're 4.5. It ends when you're 33. That's already a long time. I think I was completely in the flow of your story because I didn't feel like I was missing pieces. So you did a great job as a writer. You were telling me what I needed to know as a reader. And yet, as per my question, I felt like, wow, I know as a writer that is not easy to do in the number of pages that you gave us. So hats off for writing a book that is so complete and so powerful in those pages. I did have a question linked to what you just said. Can you tell us a bit about your relationship with your mother? The book, apart from the terrible hurt that was brought upon you, it really is about betrayal. Your father betrayed his job of care, authority over you, and subverted it, as you said, and took advantage of a child. Your mother also betrayed you.
So in many ways, although I don't want to give my father a call pass, which I've noticed people get so mad at my mother and then they forget to mention my father, who was the perpetrator. He was a criminal. There was no way around it. He committed a crime.
Yes.
Against me as a child. But I think for me personally, what he did to me was so terrible that it was hard to feel much other than anger. But with my mother, I loved her, and that betrayal was the one that hurt me more in some ways. Strangely enough, longer. That mother wound was harder to heal. Father, yes, it definitely impacted me. And again, I noticed in some comments, like I said, people tend to blame the woman, and I feel like part of the patriarchy is we go right there, and she wasn't a big mother, and yet I know deep in my heart that there was a time before this molestation issue, or before she became aware of it, where I feel it, and my memory is more scattered. The book opens with that, a very early memory, and it's my strongest early memory. But I know that there's parts that there was love there before. I can feel it in my heart. And it's something I've talked a lot with therapists about. And I believe that she gave me a certain sense of resilience as a result of it. But I always felt with my mother that I was at some point loved. And I don't think I'm deluding myself. And yet she betrayed me. Both things can be true.
Yes.
So it was more of a mixed thing. It always has been. And I think my mother and I unfortunately switched roles because of the blindness, which maybe if she hadn't gone blind, it wouldn't have happened. But because I saw her go blind and saw her get taken away, on some level, I became her protector. So at a very early age, I became this parentified child who was afraid of hurting her again. So yeah, it's really complicated. That relationship with my mother is so complicated. And I think it's always complicated when children feel that sense of abuse or betrayal by their mother. It's really hard.
But I think your honesty around it, it will speak to survivors and others who realize that relationships are complicated and none more so than our bonds with our parents. Despite people talk about estrangement and other things, we know it's always hard. And I think you saying that it's not the path that you chose, there's a very clear section. You tell us that to stay connected with her, you had to stay connected with him, and that was incredibly hard. And I think we accept that as a reader. You're human, you're their daughter. And for anyone who's had parents that fell short, and you're not alone in that, regardless of what the father did or the mother did, it's all too common. I think there's a societal myth that parents are wonderful caregivers and mothers are selfless and fathers guide their children. And those of us who haven't had that experience, we have a different narrative. And I think you've shown us that you're the child and you're making do with parents who didn't live up to these ideals.
And the small child, what other choice for your child? There was a point where I made a cognitive choice to, and I write about it in the book, to keep my mother in my life. And over the years at different points, I had conversations with different therapists who questioned, better to walk away. And I chose not to. Somebody I know asked me something who recently read the book. They didn't know the whole story because I didn't share this story with everybody. I shared it select people. And I said, this is a decision we need. And I didn't have children, so that might have changed some of that decision if I had. But I think that for me, maybe I was always still looking to fix my family or have a family. It's something I think a lot about these days now that the book is out in the world. I was very clear. It was a very clear decision, and I made it many times over my life. It was a conversation we had to have with my husband, which I've been married for 24 years now, and he knows what happened. And I have to say, this is the story. Are you going to be okay with this? And I have these people. They're here. And luckily, he could, but it's always been a conversation because there's points where we actually supported my mother financially too. And I think with my father, it was more difficult. My father was a terrible alcoholic and later a drug addict for prescription drugs. So he was such a lunatic. But by the time that I got older, he was just this out of control person generally in his life. So it was both harder and easier.
Yeah, I can understand that. And how early on in your relationship with your husband was it something you were able to tell him right away about your story?
I told him a little bit early. And it's funny because I had other relationships before him that even after I gotten help that I didn't disclose because I wasn't sure if they would be that person. I knew when I met him, he's a really solid human being, and I knew that he would have the maturity and the emotional intelligence to understand, which is support my decision. I told him a little bit early, and I told him more over time, but he really has not read the book. He didn't really want to. He's read little pieces because he helped me form out and I have schlepped him along on a few of these. So I've gone places for the book tour and places where we've had relatives, and I've schlepped them along to some of the book events, like my LA book event. He had to show up. So he knows enough about the story. I think I was only in one place where he was, where I read the opening scene. And I knew that's hard. Yeah. And I had people say, why are you picking to open this? It's going to turn readers away. And I said, it's the story.
Yeah.
It's the story. And even on the back of the book, I tell people what the story is. I think it's important for me to be honest with the reader. And that was a real decision too. Should I open with something softer and the prologue and something more that would give them more of a sense of safety. But I wanted the reader to understand how the little girl felt. Me, the little girl.
It's the inciting event. Having read it as I read it, I can't imagine it any other way. And you're right that there are other memoirs that start slightly differently. Although when I think back, sometimes you remember an opening scene and sometimes you don't. I remember the glass castle opens up very early on with she's 3 years old and she gets burned in the kitchen.
Burn scenes, oh,
Right?
yes.
Yeah, and it's about her parents' irresponsibility and how they were living and all of that. So I think the way you write it almost helps. The toughest is there in the beginning, sets up why we're reading this book, why we're with you on this journey, why you are who you are. It's a literary memoir. What does that term mean to you?
Why was a literary memoir? That's a really good question. I'll take that term. I'm not sure what this means exactly, but I take it as a compliment because there's two things. It has a very novelistic feel to it. That I know. And I've always liked memoirs that felt like a novel that I could really fly through. Not to say that I don't read more parsed and nonfiction. I read everything, but I've always liked that. The Glass Castle, Educated. I view those as all literary memoirs. And I was really conscious of the fact that I didn't want this to be this trauma dump. And I really worked hard. I view myself as a writer. And so I take pride in my writing. And that's been the biggest thing. Nobody's really said this book is poorly written anywhere. As a writer, you want people to recognize your writing also. There's the story and then there's the writing. I definitely talk about literature a lot. I am a person who has loved books their entire life for as long as I can remember. And in many ways, books were one of the things that helped me survive. The writing was one of the things that helped me survive. So I really wanted something that the reader would read the words and say, okay, yes, this is good. This is well written. At least that, if nothing else. What can literary memoir really mean? I don't know. I should look it up. We should Google it.
We should Google it. Yeah. I mean, I got that feedback too from one of my last editors. And I remember his first words to me was because I was in a cultic, narcissistic, abusive relationship. And he said to me, you haven't written a commercial cult memoir. This is a literary memoir. And I was a little bit like, so it's not going to sell in large numbers? Are people not going to get the story? And I think literary memoir, in your case, I think it's impossible not to get the story, but you have treated your reader with care. You've emphasized storytelling that we can take in. And for anyone who enjoys literature, they will resonate with your way of writing. So for me, I was like, oh, yes, I love the literary memoir. And I think people do.
I'm on the advisory board of the Distillery Rape Treatment Center now. And that's one of the gifts that this book has given me. I've been doing more advocacy work. And the woman who is the senior director of development, I gave her the book beforehand to read it. And when she came back, we had coffee. She was, the writing, my father was a writer. Writing is really good. And I was thinking, why is this a surprise? And then I realized, I think that was the other thing, really conscious saying this. There are books that are more commercially geared, or the person really just is telling their story. I wanted something that was well written. I worked hard on my writing, and I still do, and that was important to me.
Coupling such a tough subject in trauma, childhood trauma, with strength of writing is a gift.
And that means a lot. It always means a lot to me because going through it as a writer, it's so easy to question your writing.
I think it's very hard to really read our own writing with fresh eyes. Maybe if you put it away for a long time and come back, but I think it's difficult.
It's hard not to be your own critic constantly.
Do you plan to do an audiobook, or is there one?
So there is an audiobook, and I originally planned to do it myself. But I know people are going to push back and make this decision, but I have had some sinus issues and some polyps issues in my throat. And when I planned to do it, I had planned to record, and I got sick in August. My voice was gone. It still cracks a little bit now. And at that point, I decided to hire somebody. They hired an actress to do it.
Yeah.
And we just listened to her recently, and it sounds good. It was a hard decision because I really wanted to do it myself, and the people were encouraging me, but I think for right now, until this thing gets resolved once and for all, surgery, I thought it would be better if somebody else read it. So there is an audiobook coming out. Don't yell at me for not reading it myself because I really wanted to.
I think there's pros and cons. They often say with memoir, it's nice to hear the author's voice, but you're doing interviews and I think people can get to know you through hear your voice and hear your story, but reading the whole thing takes a lot of energy and it can be very hard.
I brought that too, and it's a conversation I had with my therapist. I did feel emotionally ready to do it, but then I just wondered because it was like I hadn't had these voice problems. I do think those just happened to come up. But as a person who had a mother who had hysterical blindness, I always look at tiny on things. I just decided the universe was telling me that I should have someone else do this. And I was really pleased with the actress. I was worried that if she didn't make things too childlike, it should hit the right note. I hoped it would be at the same time, but I just sent back like all night yesterday to them, and I would think it's probably going to be out in the next month or so.
That question I had is about your relationship with your sister. When there's two children in a toxic family dynamic, it can be very difficult to have a good relationship between siblings. And yet you tell us that your sister read multiple drafts. Tell us a bit about your relationship with your sister then as children when you were at home, and then how did you develop what sounds like a wonderful adult relationship?
It's funny, I thought a lot about this and read a lot about it. And I think sometimes I look at children who survive these really chaotic and memoirs, violent families, because there was violence in addition to my father being a sexual predator, which was just me. He didn't, as far as my sister ever remembered, and as far as I ever saw, molest her, which complicates things too. But children, I look at it as like children growing up together in a life raft or a prison, and it can go either way. I mean, sometimes it fractures the relationship beyond repair. But my sister, we were really close when we were little. Of course, we fought. Of course, we pulled each other's hair. We had those children have, but mostly we got along. I loved her, and I had always felt like I wanted to take care of her, like, even when she was little. She's so cute, and our personalities are different. We had moments where we were a little less close, but we've always been close. We've always been friends. And now, as we've gotten older, I talk to my sister like twice a day. I've had so much trouble. We had secrets that we were keeping because we both tried to create this facade of normalcy in our lives. So we didn't want to tell people that we didn't come from this other family that everybody thought we came from, this pretty family. And so I think that there was no one else I could really be comfortable with because she was the only person who I could tell 90% of the truth to. And even with sexual abuse, I didn't share with her till if
You say she's been a reader of many drafts of yours.
I would not have published this book if she wasn't. That was my one thing. This is a decision people have to make. My sister did not harm me, and truthfully, I wanted to make sure because she was a therapist too, and it's her story too. She grew up in that same family, and there's no way to keep her out of the story. I tried not to tell her story and make it Murray's story, but it's still her story too. So I talked to her from day one. I said, I'm writing this book. This is what it's like. And when I finished my first draft, I sent it to her and she read the first draft. She read a draft later. She told me the last time she read it, now that it's completely done, she said she didn't expect it to hit her as hard as it did, but it did. But she's doing all right with it now. I wanted to make sure that she was okay. And that as we went along, I wanted to make sure she stayed okay. There's no one else that was there. So I needed her to say, okay, do you remember this? Is this honest to where we were?
Yeah.
Because you're going as an older person writing a story from a long time ago, going a lot with memory. And I wanted someone else to say, yeah, this was it. This is right. This is the story. Just to double check some of the facts.
Yeah. You talk about forgiveness in the book. What does forgiveness mean for you? in a context like this?
Oh, I think it means for my mother, it's definitely holding on to that anger. It's understanding that she was a human. My mother was very young when she had me. I think about that a lot. Not that she should have left. There's no doubt in my mind that she should have left. Other women would have left. But I think for me, it was trying to understand her as a person and understand that maybe she couldn't, maybe she didn't have the strength to do it. Obviously, she went blind from them. And being able to continue to love her without anger. So that's what it means for me. I was angry at her still. Even even as I was writing, I realized as I read it, I said, wow, you were so angry. And I have let go of a lot of the anger when she died, which isn't to say, again, life is both things to each fair. She failed me. She put in my mind. And that was wrong. And I would have rather had her be different, but it's not that anger that boils up inside of you. That really shocks the paper. I feel like a cauldron always boiling up. It's accepting that I've always been a little angrier on some level, but not that cauldron type bubbling up, heated anger. My father, I do not forgive, but I'm not angry at him in that way. I write in a book and I still mean this. I felt nothing but relief when he died and that I don't miss him. I feel sorry for him because he missed the opportunity to be a father. I mean, it's the opportunity to be loved by two daughters. And, that I see fathers who I can tell don't treat as my husband's brother is a father to daughters. And I watch him and I see what good fathering really looks like and what really loving your daughters and he has sons too look like. But my father missed that. He never got to feel joy for us. He was such an angry, mean man. So I feel sorry for him more than anger. I get that.
Did you ever, as you entered your adult life, was there ever space or a thought that you might want children of your own? How did that play out?
They weren't children, but I didn't want them until actually I married my husband, Paul, who we're married to now. I had other relationships. But I was 40, almost 43 when we got married. And we tried, but I had a miscarriage and decided not to go too crazy with IVF, beyond just a little bit. And because I realized that it took me so long to have this stability in my life and to really be able to feel true love for somebody that I didn't want to mess it up by making my life totally about getting pregnant now, like this thing that I didn't have, which I started late. And I was afraid to have children. I really wanted a partner and feel that I was strong enough and stable enough to be a mother. And I really wasn't for a long time. So I think it's the right thing. Sometimes I'm a really good aunt. I have a lot of nieces and nephews. I'm now a great aunt. And I mentor young women. So I have a lot of younger people in my life that I get to feel and give to, not with saying as a parent, but close. Yeah, she has a daughter, and I am very close with. I talk to her several times a week, and she doesn't live here, but I've always been like her spare mother.
That's wonderful. What's next for you in terms of writing or other projects?
It's funny. I was going to go back to writing a novel, and I wrote that even in one of my entries. Oh, I'm going back to fiction. I'm never writing another memoir. It's something has clicked during this process, and I realized that I like my voice in nonfiction. I like my voice in memoir. There's another piece of this that I want to tell. It may not be quite as many years, but because there were things that I looked at later. And one of them, when it was on and off when I was young, my relationship with alcohol became something that I was so busy trying to survive that I never really examined that. And it's something that as I got older and safer, I started looking at in a different way. And so that's something I want to talk about. And in a second book, the healing process for this level of abuse continues. I learn more things. We're always peeling an onion and we're in that place. And the damage that it does, this is really, you don't unfortunately wake up one day and get well, but you can heal. And then I have healed and I continue to heal. And you don't have to make your life about one big trauma. You can look at things. Sometimes things are not 100% related to the alcohol, it's just related to you, but you never get to look at it. And then with the trauma, like alcohol isn't necessarily related to it. It's to lots of people.
Often they say it is related, isn't it, to trauma? But yes, you can look at it in a separate lens.
Once again, I think two things can be true.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the thing I want to write about. It's a different kind of recovery. And it's not quite as dramatic because I never went through quite as much. And also about perhaps, and I haven't figured out how to marry this yet, but it's that what I've gotten from writing this book, which is like moving into this advocacy world.
Maybe this is a good segue for my question to you is what is your message to other survivors?
So my first message to survivors is always, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. A crime was perpetrated against you, whether childhood sexual abuse or other kinds of sexual abuse, or even domestic violence in the family, because we had that too. These things are not your fault. And the next thing I try to tell people is that healing is possible, and the but is you need to admit that this, whatever happened, because one of the things I tried to do, I thought if I was smart enough, not educated enough, I could pretend it away and tell myself it never happened. And it just doesn't work that way. You need at some point to begin the process of unraveling it, admitting it to yourself. And I'm a big advocate of therapy. That's a really great beginning, I think, to begin that conversation. And begin the conversation to tell people, even if you don't want to go to a therapist and you want to try a hotline in your community, RAIN has a national hotline. It can connect you to rape treatment centers all over the country. And I think beginning that story of telling, because healing is possible and you just don't have to win. When I was a kid, my body looked like a mouth of razor blades. And it's not necessary to hurt yourself much. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to get that out in the world and share it with us. I think it's really important to do as survivors. I'm so glad I wrote the book because everywhere I go, someone comes up to me and tells me that this is their story or a similar story. And you just say thank you. That's the reason I wrote the book. I knew this book isn't going to catapult me to fame and glory, but I did want it to create some awareness for other people that if you see this happening, please tell someone. If you see this happening with a child, don't look away.
Yeah. Yeah. You commented there, you thought if you were successful or educated enough, you could repress it or not dwell on it. You had two other careers, right? You've been in nursing and then a lawyer. Did you leave that behind to go to writing? Can you tell us about your career transition as our final question?
So I was a nurse first, and I liked being a nurse. I liked helping people, but I always thought I would probably want to do more. And nursing, especially back then when I started, it was hard to have a voice. So I went to law school, and I always picked careers that I was a little afraid to write full time. I needed to have a framework around me. I knew that about myself. I didn't completely trust my own. I needed to be in stable places because I knew I was hiding a big secret, and I had a lot to work through that I was refusing to work through. But I went to law school and I was a lawyer a long time. I was a lawyer even when I got my MFA. I was a little afraid if I had any talent and whether it would pay to quit my job. And so I was much older by the time that I started writing full time. I was already 62 and I'd been a lawyer a long time. But I had always wrote. I was the 5 o'clock in the morning writer. When I got my MFA, I did a low residency program, and I was the person who got up at 5 and wrote, and then spent the weekend locked in the house writing. I think when you write because you have to write, please,
Yeah.
it's a calling, and I just wanted to write. But at the same time, I worked, and I think for a long time I needed the stability in the work. And I didn't have a safety net. I didn't have a parental safety net for sure. And I had to support myself. I was lucky. I got a lot of scholarships through different schools, and I always needed the means to pay my own rent. And so I had these careers, and I think it's possible to do that. Everyone chooses a different path in writing. Sometimes, I wish I had said, oh, I'm going to quit and then just write at the age of 45 and just keep writing full time, and who knows what would have been. I've learned not to regret my paths and just be really grateful that I have now still enough time in my life I call this my third act. It's my act of being a writer and also of being an advocate and working with survivors. And there's, lots of people who survived sexual abuse. And I've been going out and talking about it. I volunteer once a week in a place called Stewart House, which is for children who have, and I get to be the play lady with the kids in between their forensic evaluations and their therapy. So I look at this as my third act on my new door that opens.
That is just fabulous. I'm really so happy that you have been able to tell your story, and helping and reaching out to survivors is really incredible, Andrea. Well done to you. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me, and for our listeners at Elevating Voices. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me, and to your listeners who are writing memoirs, keep writing.